legado robado, de Los Oradores Maleficios, del Libro de la Noche, Las Crónicas de Spiderwick, y entre toda su obra que es realmente alucinante. Y ahora sí me voy a mover al inglés. Welcome to Spain, Holly, how are you?
So good, thank you for having me.
No, it's great to have you here. I mean, after all these years working together, so it's amazing to have you here finally. So how do you feel like the first time touring in Spain?
I'm having such a good time. We are currently in an incredibly beautiful comic store. Yesterday, we walked around an incredibly beautiful square and ate an extremely delicious meal, so I'm doing great.
Okay, that is great to hear, that is great to hear. So, Holly, basically we are going to talk a little bit about all your books, but we are going to start with the Spiderwick series.
Okay.
That is one of your former books. So, what can you tell us about these amazing books that are turning into a TV show now, right?
Yeah, Tony and I have been lucky enough to have had them adopted into a film in 2008, and now again into a show for Disney Plus coming out at some point in the indeterminate future. But the books themselves really came out of Tony and I loving fairy folklore, being friends, and him really wanting to do this this big illustrated book of fairies, and us sort of then figuring out what the story behind it was. And the first book of this was my second book ever, and my first collaboration, and it has such a special place in my heart.
Okay, talking about your first book ever, how was the process of becoming an author? Like, when did you decide, I want to write stories, I want to be an author? How was that process?
I wanted to be a writer from the time I was very little, and I wrote a lot of bad books and stories over the years, and then sometime in my 20s I started the novel that would become Time, which was my first book.
Yeah. And
it took me 5 years. I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't know how you got people up off the couch and on into adventures. And I don't know if anyone out there is writing their first book, but you're teaching yourself everything. You're teaching yourself plotting, you're teaching yourself characterization, you're teaching yourself dialogue. So it took me about 5 years. And then at the end, I had this thing, and I thought of it as an adult novel. It was the story of someone who discovers they're a fairy changeling. And she's 16, but I thought, if she was 30 or something, you might think she was maybe not the sharpest knife in the drawer, figure it out at that point.
Yeah.
So, and I read lots of adult books with 16-year-old protagonists, but then I had a friend who was a children's librarian, and she said, I think you've written a YA novel. And I said, what? Because I didn't really understand modern YA. And she gave me Garth Nix and Tamora Pierce.
Oh, yeah.
And I read both of those, and I was like, well, I don't know if that's what I wrote, but I'm in, this is great.
Okay, I feel like something that is very characteristic of you is your writing style. I mean, I read it like in every single review, and I feel it when I read your books. You have like the perfect balance between descriptions, action, world building. So, tell us a little bit about Elfane, your most famous world probably. I mean, the world that everyone is dying for, that everyone wants to go. So what can you tell us about Elfane, how this world came to you?
So I had been writing at that point fairy books for a long time, and I had this idea for the Folk of the Air series. And at first I thought of them as a high fantasy. I thought of it as a high fantasy series, and in a secondary world. And then I realized I could bring it into my fairy. And it grew a lot in that, once I started realizing I could put those two things together, but I also realized I would have to go into fairy. That previously I had been writing about people who were on the edges of it, people who didn't know it and then were brought in. But writing about Jude, a character who grows up in Elfane, she's going to have the answers to a lot of secrets. And so I was going to have to do a lot more world building and a lot more decision making.
Yeah.
But that was a really fun experience to actually now figure out how fairy works, how the courts work, how they're related to one another. But it came out of a desire to take this idea and move it into fairy.
Okay, and now that we have just published the Stoner, some very popular question is, can people read this book independently from the Cruel Prince, or they need to read first the Cruel Prince to go into this new duology?
I don't think you need to know anything actually about over there to go into the Stolen Air. No, I don't think you need to know.
Okay, great.
You have some weird perceptions of people. Right? You'll have some strange, like, it would be interesting to read Book of Beer after.
Yeah.
I'd be like, wait, what? But yeah.
Okay. And then I want to talk about these books that I have over here. That is a series that I really love. White Cat, Red Glove, and Black Heart. How did you come up with the idea for this trilogy?
So, it's interesting because I had at that point, before I wrote this, I had been writing fairy books between Spiderwick and Modern Fairy Tales for 10 years. And I really wanted to create my own magic system, and I wanted to write about something else that I really love, which are cons and crime fiction and noir. And so I made up this magical mobster world where there's touch magic, and so everyone is loved all the time. And we meet Castle Sharp, who is the youngest son of a family of criminals, who all of whom have magic except for him.
Okay, that's great. And I have here a tricky question for you. Where do you put this series between the YA and the adult spectrum?
I mean, I think that to me, they sit pretty firmly in YA because he's in this.
Yeah.
But, you know, I see what you mean, that there's a lot of adult characters and a lot of adult things.
And especially, I feel, something very interesting about this series, we got a lot of attention of the adult audience over this trilogy, and that was very interesting because I feel like at some point, this really stands out from the YA market that we have now, you know, so it can appeal also for an older audience. And it's very cool because at some point, it's like you can bring people into your writing from another spectrum, so that's why we try to make this more adult covers, you know? It's like to give it more an adult feeling.
I considered writing those as adult books, you know?
Really?
I did.
Yeah.
So I can see it, I can see it.
Yeah.
But I think those books changed my writing forever, because
Really?
I did so much research into writing, like how you write noir, how you write crime, and I read so much like Dashiell Hammett, and like I just and when I was done, I really feel like I brought a lot of that stuff back into like the other fantasy work I do. I think I can see it in Cold Town, I can see it in it's in Book of the Year, I can see the sort of crime fiction con business, and then again in Book of Night.
Yeah, but now let's go to the Book of Night. That is like your adult debut, right?
Yeah.
So, first, many questions about it. How was the process like moving from YA to adult? In terms of writing, there was something that changed in your routine, in the way you write, or it was basically more a marketing thing, saying this is adult or this is YA?
I think I thought it would not be tricky, but I did a lot of second guessing myself. I didn't always feel sure-footed in terms of what the differences were. But in the end, I think probably the biggest difference that my editor said to me is that they were to slow down in more places, that adults were willing to, accept longer scenes, which was an interesting thing to do. I also wrote that book in 2020, so all of my routines were disrupted. So it's very hard for me to categorize in what way writing that book was different.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a tricky moment to write the book, actually. But it's also cool, like, to make the change in a moment that the whole world was changing, you know. So it was like a complete change for you.
I did feel like when I was writing the beginning, I was like, I am more stressed than Charlie Hunnam.
So, can you give us like a short pitch of what is the Book of Night about?
Sure, I've tried. So it is about Charlie Hall. She is a thief of books that explain how shadow magic works in a world in which there are glow mists who have these thickened or activated shadows that they can do various things with, including making them solid and going into places, stealing things, potentially killing people with their shadows. But they hide their secrets from one another. So she's the one who goes in there and takes their notes and books and what have you. And she's trying to put all that behind her and not doing the greatest job.
Okay, I mean, it's amazing. I feel like everyone that loves fantasy and dark fantasy will have a great time reading this book. It's okay, here I have some random questions from readers that they submitted via social media. So, here one regarding the stolen herb.
Okay.
This says, the name of the girl is Lou. Will we see more of Jude and Cardan's story in the stolen herb?
You will not see Jude and Cardan in Stolen Air. You will, however, see them in the second book in that trilogy, in The Prisoner's Storm.
Perfect. Then, who do you relate most to, Cardan or Jude? This is from Atenea Books.
Jude, she's our protagonist, and I always feel like I'm relating the most to the protagonist, in part because I have to, right? Because I'm in their head. But in part because that's what we get means that it's their story.
Okay. Then here we have a question from Peru, from Mari Books. Did you know how the stolen heir was going to end before writing it?
I did. I did know how it was going to end, although, I knew how it was going to end generally. I did not actually know how it was going to end specifically.
Okay. So you had a bad idea of what was going to happen. So basically you are the kind of authors that plan everything beforehand, or you start writing and then you change and in the middle of the process.
I'm the kind of writer who plans everything beforehand and then does not stick to the plan.
But that is interesting. I mean, a new way of planning, Okay, here is a question that was made many times. Would you give some advice for aspiring authors?
Absolutely. So some of the stuff is probably going to seem obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Read a lot. Read everything. Read in different genres. If you want to be a fantasy writer, read older fantasy. Go back and see where our modern stuff comes from and what the conversation is, so you can be part of it. Write a lot and rewrite a lot, because writing is rewriting, and write all the way to the end, because otherwise you just get good at writing beginnings. And I know it's really painful. This is an area where do as I say, not as I do. The reason it took me 5 years, I never wrote to the end. Don't do what I did. And then the thing that really helped me probably the most, and I know it's not necessarily the thing that everybody feels comfortable with, but getting a critique partner, somebody I could share my work with, somebody who kept me to my self-imposed deadlines. And you don't just, it's not just finding out what's wrong with what you're doing, it's also finding out what's right. Like your critique partner can be like, keep this part is working. And when you read their work, you also become a better critiquer of your own work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Not for everybody, but it really helped me.
Okay, I have some other questions before keep going with the reader's questions. Going back to the beginning of the talk, when you mentioned that you always knew that you wanted to be a writer, how do you feel now, like today, being in Spain on tour, being a best-selling author, having been translated into so many languages, having written so many books? So, what is the feeling? How can you describe the feeling of who you are today as an actor, as the Holly of today?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer this. I'm going back in time a little bit. So when I sold my very first book, I was happy for 3 months straight. Like, just happy all the time. Somebody rear-ended my car and I was like, that's okay! I'm happy! Because it was my goal. It was my goal to sell a book. And then I had probably the only depression I have ever had, where I became convinced over the summer that I was about to die. And I started looking up pseudo-scientific articles on the afterlife, because I really needed to know what was going to happen, because soon I would be dead. And many years later, I think Cassie Clare, when I met, she was telling me that it happens to lottery winners, because you think, my goal is this. And for me, my goal was to sell one book. And when I did, my brain was like, well, that's it.
You are done in this life, I mean, what's coming next, yeah.
And so everything else is completely beyond my imagination. And certainly being here and doing this, way beyond my imagination of what could possibly happen.
And do you have today like a next goal, something that you dream about reaching? Like, I mean, anything that comes to your mind in terms of goal in your career?
I mean, I think that to me, success as a writer is staying in publishing, it's staying on the horse, it's continuing to write books that people like. You know, it's the next book, and the next book being the book that y'all enjoy and want to read and are willing to come out for. And it is a more scary goal than it seems.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because in each book, I think, you know, is this one gonna work? Is this one gonna, you know, am I going to be able to get it right?
Yeah, and that makes sense. I feel like something very inspiring from you is like, I mean, you have been in the market for many years and you're still here.
20 years! 20 years.
And that's amazing because especially the YA market is like very tricky because maybe you have a big series and then the next book, I mean, it doesn't sell. So, and you have been like even writing like fantasy over all these years, even a long time before, because now fantasy is like the big thing. Everyone is writing fantasy, but you have been writing fantasy for 20 years. So there is I mean, a great, I mean, you did something great there.
I've had a lot of highs, I've had some lows.
Yeah.
You know, Michael, stay on the horse.
Yeah, okay, so I feel like you have a great goal, like to stay there and hold on. So then, going back to the Stolen Era, can you pitch this book? I mean, especially thinking about the people that haven't read your books yet. So how would you pitch the Stolen Era?
So we are following a girl named Ren, and she is a fairy who grew up in the mortal world, was stolen away to an evil court, which is where she actually came from, and then managed to escape. But when she is returned to the mortal world, she no longer finds a way to fit into it. And so she's living feral in the woods until she is approached by Prince Oak of Elfane, who wants her to go on a quest with him to destroy the court of which she is technically the queen.
Okay, that sounds promising, guys. So now I'm going back to the reader's questions. Here, Veracelo asks, did you draw inspiration from yourself to create Jude's personality?
I mean, yes and no. I think that there's some of me and Jude there, but Jude is the story. I mean, you know, the story of her is the story of somebody who has had an incredibly traumatic thing happen to her. She had her parents murdered, and then she was raised by the murderer of her parents, who she came to think of as her dad.
Yeah.
And the level of stress that she lives with on a daily basis has prepared her for extremely stressful situations. It has not at all prepared her for situations where things are okay. And that is a very specific character who I am not. And so I think I can find my way into Jude, but she's not me.
Okay. Then here, Sarah wants to know, this is a weird question. If Jude were an animal, what would he be?
Kind of animal. Oh my god. A weasel.
Okay. And let me see what else I have here. Which character came to your mind first when writing The Stolen Era?
So I probably knew about Jude and Pardon at about the same time.
Okay.
Like sometimes people ask me if I was surprised by what happened to Pardon. Like I didn't. No, I mean that's the plan. That's how, you know, just that was the story.
Yeah.
So I knew them probably about the same time.
Okay, and basically you are the kind of authors that have like in mind the plot and you find the characters to make that plot work, or first you meet your characters and then you develop the plot for them?
I have the characters, I know about them, and I often have a feeling of, it's either an image in my mind or just a feeling of how I want, it's going to sound like the texture of the book to be, like how what the feeling of the book is. And so for me, I have to write the first chapter.
Okay.
And a lot of times I don't know very much when I'm writing the first chapter, and I'm sort of feeling my way through it. Because once I sort of get how they talk and how what the visuals of the book are, I feel like I plot from there.
Okay, what was the most challenging book that you have written in your career? The more tricky, like?
Maybe book nine.
Okay.
Because there were some things with it where I was not sure I was going to. There's a lot of surprises. There's a lot of characters who aren't exactly who they seem, and it was those precision of those things were really hard. Where at the same time I was creating a magic system.
Yeah.
There was a long time when I was freaking out about whether it was all gonna come together.
Plus this huge pandemic that it was. So it was like
Well, I used to write in a community. Like I would go with a short story writer who's doing a novelist, Kelly Link, to our friend Cassie Claire's house, and we went there every day and wrote together. On our separate things, but together. And so the other thing that was different about that is we were writing it alone. There was nobody around. I mean, my family was around, which was not.
No, it wasn't easy. I mean, yeah. Okay, let me see what else I have here. Did you consider at some point an alternative ending for any of your books, and then you changed it? Maybe like a radical change, like.
I mean, so there's definitely, I change everything. But there's a very specific ending to the Folk of the Air series where I wrote a couple paragraphs that actually wrote the end and then ditched it. And then rewrote the end and I put it up somewhere on my newsletter so you could read it. But it's not a different actual ending of the book, it's just a different place.
Okay,
but I've considered different endings probably for every book.
Okay, here is another question that these readers love. Did you ever think about killing one of the main characters of your books?
I need to be extremely mean in my books and extremely brutal because I have a very soft heart. No.
We need the main characters alive, guys. I mean, it's like... Okay, here, Caro wants to know, this question comes from Peru too. When is Cartan Greenbrier's birthday?
I have no idea.
That's great to know, you see, that's great to know. Okay guys, then we're going to talk about some exclusive news that any of you know yet, but next year we're going to publish Gold Bones. That is one amazing, fantastic book that Bonnie has written. So what can you tell us about Gold Bones?
Alright, so there's a lot of things about it, but alright, so Gold Bones is the story of 3 kids who have to bury a doll that may or may not be haunted. And it is a little bit spooky, and it is a lot about that time in life when you have been making up stories together with your friends, and some of them have decided that that's childish and illegal, so they're behind.
Okay. I feel like Gold Bones is like very unique and special book. I mean, stay tuned to book social media. Very soon we are going to announce the publication date and everything, and look at the cover in Goodreads because the cover, the illustrations, I am obsessed with that cover. It's very nice. And talking about covers, how involved you are in the design of the covers of your books? I mean, you have a say there, it's more up to marketing, the editor. How is the process?
So, at this point in my career, I do have more of a say. I do get to give my thoughts and feelings about covers. But obviously, I'm not designing the covers, and so it's always a collaborative process. It's always a process where you're going back and forth. And, you both don't have as much power as my wish as a writer, but also, like, you are, you don't always know either. Like, I remember having an idea for the girlfriends, and when they came to me with the cover, it was so much better than anything I could have done.
Yeah, I feel like those covers are iconic, It's like, and I am in love with the Book of Night. I love that aesthetic and everything. It's very loyal to the content of the book,
And I think when you get a cover that's right, just like you can feel it. You're just like, oh,
this is the way. Even if then you make some tweaks, you say like, this is the way that we need to follow, Okay, then Holly, I mean, you have like so many readers throughout the world. You have many people in Latin America. They are very excited to finally have your books. This trilogy has been out for a while now. Spiderwick, now extraordinary. Do you have any message for your Spanish and Latin American readers?
I love you guys, and I hope to come to see you next.
Yeah, I mean, I promise we're going to work too, because I mean, when we announced that you were coming to Spain, everyone was like, why she doesn't come to Mexico, to Argentina, I mean, guys, Holly has a lot of job to do. She needs to keep writing, but we promise that in the upcoming years, we are going to make it happen. At some point, we are going to try to take Holly to see all of you guys and have an experience with this amazing author. Holly, thank you very, very much for being here, for sharing this little talk with all of us, and it's a pleasure to have you here in Spain.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing my books.
No, thank you. Bueno, chicos, esto fue nuestra charla con Holly Black. Gracias a todos por estar del otro lado. Estén atentos porque vamos a estar haciendo concursos en redes sociales para que se puedan llevar sus libros firmados. Especialmente en Latinoamérica van a tener una oportunidad que estamos trabajando en